They didn't expect me to show up. Honestly, I didn't expect it either. The wedding invitation sat on my desk like an accusation. Heavy cardstock, embossed gold trim, thick enough to feel expensive, cold enough to feel intentional. There was no warmth in the design, just precision. The envelope was addressed formally. Commander Natalie Quinn, not Natalie, not Nat. Certainly not our daughter, just a title. Like that would make me easier to swallow. I opened it slowly, more out of habit than curiosity. The location was Charleston. My sister Danielle was getting married to someone I'd never heard of. The rest of the invite was neat and sterile. Date, time, dress code, RSVP instructions. Then, tucked into the corner, a note in my mother's familiar script. Just one word. Comport. Not, "We hope you come." Not, "We miss you." Just that one clipped command. Behave. I stared at it for a long time, the word warping in my mind. Was this an invitation? A warning? A test? Or maybe it wasn't about me at all. I stood and walked to the window of my quarters in Okinawa, watching the morning sun glint off the sea. Below, a new batch of recruits were running drills, shouting cadence with the kind of energy only the unbroken have. They didn't yet know what it feels like to be erased. Not by war, but by blood. My mother hadn't spoken to me in 6 years. Not after the hearings, not after the false allegations. Not even when I was medically evacuated from Kandahar with a collapsed lung. But now she wanted me at Danielle's wedding, or more accurately, wanted me presentable at Danielle's wedding. A knock broke my thoughts. Lieutenant Park stepped in with a respectful nod. "Ma'am, this came through protocol routing." She nodded toward the envelope still in my hand. Her gaze lingered. "Will you go?" I hesitated. I don't know. They made it clear I wasn't part of the family anymore. Park looked me straight in the eye. "Then maybe it's not about being part of their family," she said. "Maybe it's about reminding them what they lost." I didn't answer, but the thought stayed with me. I hadn't worn my uniform for them in years, but if I stepped back into that world even for one day, I wouldn't do it for their forgiveness. I'd do it to show them I was still standing, and they don't get to pretend I disappeared. Charleston greeted me like it always did, genteel and gorgeous, pretending it had no ghosts. The rental car crunched quietly up the gravel driveway of the Quinn estate, a pristine colonial house with manicured hedges and a flagpole that hadn't flown the American flag since my father passed. That detail stung more than I expected. The front door opened before I even rang the bell. There she was, Veronica Quinn, my mother. Pearl earrings, a navy cardigan pressed to perfection, not a strand of silver hair out of place. Time had softened her face, but not her eyes. They were still sharp, still measuring. "Natalie," she said, not moving from the doorway. Her tone was even, practiced. "Please don't cause a scene. It's your sister's big weekend." Not hello, not how have you been. Just a warning. I nodded once, stepped past her into the house that used to be home. It still smelled like lemon polish and control. The same ivory drapes, the same furniture, the same portrait of my father over the mantel, frozen in campaign trail confidence. Everything was exactly as I'd left it, except me. I followed the sound of chatter to the dining room. 14 people were already seated around the long mahogany table. The only empty chair was at the far end, near the swinging kitchen door, where the heat from the stove would hit you every few minutes, just enough to make you sweat. It was the least desirable seat in the room, always had been. They hadn't even bothered to hide it. I took it without a word. Someone glanced up, one of Danielle's sorority friends. She leaned to the woman next to her and whispered, "Is that security?" I didn't flinch. Across the table, Aunt Marlene gave a tight-lipped smile and then returned to her shrimp cocktail. No one else acknowledged me. There were no photos of me on the walls. Not in uniform, not out of it. But Danielle's graduation, Danielle's campaign work, Danielle in every angle of golden lighting, she was framed everywhere. I picked up the menu card beside my plate, printed in delicate script. "We are so grateful for family." I almost laughed. But the truth is, I wasn't angry. Not yet, I was just watching. Because every glance they avoided, every silence they inserted like a scalpel, it all told me exactly who they were still trying to be, and exactly how much they needed me not to exist. Which is why I had come, not to be accepted, but to ensure I was finally seen. The Charleston Oak Room was dripping in luxury, all marble floors and gilded fixtures, a chandelier that looked like it cost more than my last deployment budget. A quartet played a too-sweet version of Canon in D. Servers glided like they'd been trained at Versailles. I stepped inside alone. No one came to greet me. A hostess pointed me to the seating chart displayed on a golden easel near the entryway. Names were arranged in soft cursive, clustered in prestige. Table 1, Danielle and Benjamin. Table 2, the Quinns. Table 3, state delegates. On and on. Then I saw it. Table 12, N, Quinn. Not Commander Quinn. Not Natalie. Just a lonely N, buried among distant cousins and a family friend who once referred to the Navy as Natalie's little phase. I found the table tucked by the catering doors, just close enough to hear the clatter of dishes, but far enough to be ignored by the photographer. The napkin at my place was ivory, a slightly different hue from the other cream-toned linens. Subtle, but deliberate, like a bad copy of belonging. Even the place card had a smudge across my name, almost like someone tried to erase it and thought better of it halfway through. I took my seat in silence. The room buzzed with easy laughter, clinking glasses, and whispered gossip that didn't include me. At the front, Danielle floated through the crowd like royalty. Her dress shimmered like champagne in motion. She smiled with every tooth, hugged every arm. And then she saw me. She approached, trailed by 2 bridesmaids and a photographer adjusting his lens. "Natalie," she said, voice sugary and brittle. We tried to keep the theme warm, soft, not too military, Didn't want to make people uncomfortable. She didn't wait for a reply, just gave me that same patronizing smile she used at 13 and turned back toward the camera flash. I stayed seated. I'd once pulled intelligence that helped redirect a drone strike away from Benjamin's convoy overseas. Saved 3 lives that day. He didn't know. Danielle didn't ask. The toasts began. First was Uncle Grant with a story about Danielle's grace under pressure. Then a family friend raised a glass to legacy and loyalty. And then my mother stood. "Tonight," she said, smiling thinly, "we toast those who've stayed true. Those who remember where they come from and who they represent." She didn't look at me, but she didn't have to. They had choreographed every detail, every slight, every glance designed to frame me as an outsider dressed like duty. What they didn't realize was that they'd built the perfect battlefield, and I had just stepped into it, on my terms. I don't remember who raised the next glass. Maybe a bridesmaid. Maybe one of Danielle's PR interns masquerading as a lifelong friend. They were all blurring together now. Polished, perfumed, rehearsed. Then Danielle took the microphone. She looked radiant, flawless. She knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. "To family," she said with a gleam in her eye. "Even those who surprise us by showing up." The crowd chuckled. She paused, letting it settle. "Especially my big sister," she continued, gesturing vaguely toward my table near the exit, "who flew in all the way from wherever they assign people to guard. Hallways, I guess." The room erupted in laughter. Sharp, easy, cruel. It didn't matter that I'd led 3 classified missions in the last 2 years, or that I'd been awarded the Bronze Star. To them, I was a punchline. My jaw didn't move. I had been trained to hold steady under incoming fire, and this wasn't even pressure. Then my mother, ever the finale, lifted her champagne flute and added with a practiced smirk, "Well, at least she wore her uniform right this time." Laughter again. Louder this time. Bolder. Because cruelty always grows in rooms where no one expects consequence. I stood. The noise faltered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I simply turned toward them. Toward all the glittering gowns and tailored suits, the expensive veneers and the shallow smiles. And I said clearly, "The people I report to have the authority to declare war, to authorize missions that determine the fate of nations. You wouldn't even pass the first stage of background checks to sit in the room." Silence. Total. A waiter froze mid-step. The string quartet stopped playing. I didn't blink. Didn't move. Then a sound broke the stillness. A chair sliding gently against the floor. From the front table, Benjamin Reyes, Danielle's fiancé, stood. His face was pale, jaw tight. He looked across the room at me, and not with pity, with precision. And then slowly and deliberately, he saluted. A sharp, formal regulation salute. You could have heard a wine glass drop. And in fact, someone did. He held the salute for a breath, then said in a voice that cut through crystal, "This is Commander Natalie Quinn, my former commanding officer. She saved my life in Mosul. Twice. And she deserves your respect." Danielle's hand shot to her mouth. Her wine glass slipped, hit the floor, and shattered. The room? Dead silent. No one knew where to look. But I knew where I stood. And for the first time in years, so did they. Benjamin's hand dropped from his brow with precision. And then, still standing tall in front of his bride's family, in the middle of his own rehearsal dinner, he turned to me and said, "Commander, ma'am, thank you for everything." He didn't elaborate, didn't try to soften it, because he knew, and now they all did. A single gasp cut the silence, then another. Danielle looked like someone had unplugged her. Pale, motionless. The perfect hair, the perfect posture, cracked in an instant. I stayed still. Then I heard the creak of another chair. From table 6, a man stood up slowly. Gray hair, sturdy build, quiet demeanor. I hadn't recognized him earlier. He'd blended in among the donors and cousins. But now? Now I saw the ribbon bar pinned discreetly to the inside lapel of his blazer. Brigadier General Thomas Carr, retired, Air Force Intelligence. He gave me a nod. No words, just the kind of acknowledgement you don't give lightly. Then another, a woman near the back. Mid-50s, clean-cut navy blue dress. She rose with quiet grace and gave a slow, deliberate salute. Not casual, not symbolic, authentic. Colonel Dana Winslow, former JAG. She held it for a beat longer than protocol. My mother shifted in her seat, lips parting like she was preparing to reassert control. But no one looked at her. The room had tilted. The eyes that once looked past me now searched for where to land. Unsure, uneasy, unprepared, because this wasn't the version of me they remembered. The version they thought they'd buried under embarrassment, silence, and spin. This version didn't apologize for existing. Danielle tried to speak. I saw her mouth form the start of my name, but the sound never came. Benjamin stayed by her side, unmoving, eyes forward. More guests stood. Not many. But enough. People who had served, people who understood the weight behind a uniform they once laughed at. And suddenly, I wasn't the black sheep. I was the storm they had pretended would never return. Evelyn, my mother, finally stood, clutching her champagne flute like a weapon. "This isn't the time," she said sharply. "Let's not derail." But no one was looking at her anymore. The center of the room had shifted, and it wasn't hers to control. I didn't speak again. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, silence was no longer something they used to erase me. It was the space they had to sit in and reckon with. The lounge at the hotel was dimly lit, elegant in that old money way. Dark wood paneling, velvet chairs, crystal light fixtures that didn't bother to pretend they were modern. Veronica Quinn sat near the corner window, posture straight, cardigan perfectly buttoned. She didn't look shaken. She looked rehearsed. "Natalie," she said as I approached. "You certainly made an impression tonight." I sat without responding. She offered a smile, brittle at the edges. "Some of the headlines are dramatic. Military hero crashes sister's rehearsal dinner. I'm sure the press will have fun with it." I said nothing. Let the silence stretch. She hated silences she couldn't fill. She cleared her throat. "I didn't come to rehash the past," she said, "but perhaps it would be wise to release a short statement, neutral of course, just clarifying that we were never estranged, that there was simply misunderstanding." There it was. Not regret. Just damage control. I opened the leather folio on my lap and slid a document across the table. She glanced down. Her eyes narrowed. Office of Naval Intelligence. Anonymous Ethics Complaint Investigation. I assume you remember this, I said calmly. 5 years ago, someone accused me of falsifying mission logs, claimed I was emotionally unstable, said my Bronze Star was political. Veronica said nothing. I lost a command over that. Temporarily lost my clearance, and not a single call from my family. Just silence. She looked up. Her mouth opened, but I slid forward the second page before she could form a defense. Forensic linguistic analysis, I said. Navy issued. Sentence structure, phrasing, syntax patterns. I tapped the bottom of the page. Primary match, Danielle Quinn. Secondary contributor, Veronica M. Quinn. Her fingers stiffened against her coffee cup. I didn't write it, she said, too quickly. No, I replied. You gave her the language. You gave her access. You gave her the tone. Veronica blinked once. She was overwhelmed. The election, the media. She tried to end my career, I said flatly, and you helped her load the weapon. Veronica's face faltered, just for a moment. I made decisions to protect the family, she whispered. No. You made decisions to protect your favorite daughter from ever having to stand beside a stronger one. The room was quiet but charged. I didn't stop loving you, she murmured. No, I said. You just stopped showing up. Veronica reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and hovered it above the table between us, halfway across, not quite landing. I never wanted to lose you. You didn't lose me, I replied softly. You erased me, and now you want the footage edited. She said nothing. And this time, I didn't wait for her to try. I didn't attend the wedding. While Danielle walked down the aisle under strings of lights and an orchestral arrangement of Can't Help Falling in Love, I was already on a flight out of Boston airspace. First class. One way, passport in hand. I left the formal gown hanging in the closet of my hotel room. They wouldn't miss me. Not because they'd made peace with my absence, but because they'd already rehearsed it long ago. I didn't check the live stream. I didn't scroll the comments. I didn't open the news alerts piling in my inbox. But the clip had already gone viral. Someone, probably a server, had captured the moment Benjamin saluted me. The headline read, "They mocked the commander. Then her future brother-in-law saluted, and silence fell." 6 million views by the third day. I never shared it. Never commented. Not once. The truth had already walked into the room. It didn't need amplification. 2 days later, the Navy reached out. They wanted to discuss a new position. Senior Ethics Liaison to the Joint Armed Forces Panel. A career-defining opportunity. Prestige, power, visibility. I declined. I didn't need a promotion to prove I had survived. Instead, I funneled the media attention into something else. Something quieter, but far more important. The Sentinel Project. A nonprofit offering legal, emotional, and career support to service members betrayed not by foreign threats, but by the people who claimed to love them. Parents who submitted anonymous ethics complaints, siblings who sabotaged clearances, spouses who leaked files out of spite. We help them rebuild. We make sure the silence that nearly buried them doesn't bury anyone else. I set up the foundation's headquarters in Lisbon, where I'd relocated. A whitewashed building near the coast, nothing fancy, just solid, like the people we serve. Some mornings I just walk the shoreline. No uniform, no rank, no one watching. It's funny. I spent most of my life believing that redemption would come when they admitted what they did. That I'd feel free once I heard the words, "We were wrong." But healing didn't come from their mouths. It came from my own decision to stop waiting. A few weeks after I landed in Portugal, a letter arrived at the foundation office. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Veronica Quinn. "I watched your PBS interview," it said. "You've built something incredible. I'm sorry I didn't understand who you were before." I folded the letter once, slipped it into a drawer, unanswered. Because this time she doesn't get a reply, and I no longer need one. The ocean off the Lisbon coast moved like breath. Calm, rhythmic, steady. I stood barefoot on the terrace of my small rented cottage, coffee cup warm in my hands, watching the morning mist lift from the water. Down below, a fisherman in a weathered blue cap was casting nets while humming to himself. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anything. No mission briefing, no email from command, no apology. Just the sound of wind, sea, and stillness. Inside, my inbox was full. Requests from journalists, foundation partners, even a few distant cousins who suddenly remembered I existed. I hadn't answered any of them. I would. Eventually. But not today. Today, I was just Natalie. Not Commander, not the disgraced daughter, not the woman who was mocked, then saluted, just someone who had finally stopped bleeding for people who never brought a bandage. A knock came at the gate. I turned to find Sophia, the landlord's granddaughter, standing with a basket of eggs, olives, and fresh bread. Her curls bounced in the breeze, and her English was careful but sweet. "Are you really a commander?" she asked, eyes wide. I smiled. "Once," I said. "Now I just help people remember they're not alone." She beamed and ran off, sandals slapping the stone steps, singing something I couldn't quite make out. I sat at the terrace table, spread the bread with local honey, and let the sun hit my shoulders. I used to think peace was something I had to earn, through rank, obedience, or silence. But it turns out, peace begins the moment you stop begging to be loved by people who only value your disappearance. My mother's letter was still in the drawer, unanswered. Not out of anger, out of clarity. She saw me, she just didn't want to. And now? Now she doesn't get access to who I've become, not because I hate her, but because I finally love myself enough to choose distance without guilt. That is the kind of love that took me decades to learn. The kind that doesn't ask for permission to exist. The kind that lets you walk away without needing to win. The clip from the wedding is still floating around somewhere. I hear it's being used in leadership seminars and ethics classes. I haven't watched it since. I don't need to. Because I remember exactly how it felt. Stillness, precision, truth, and a salute that didn't ask for permission, just delivered justice quietly, with spine and steel. So if you've ever been erased, overlooked, replaced, or betrayed, not by enemies but by family, know this. You're still real, still here. And they don't get the last word unless you give it to them. Final message to viewers. Have you ever had to walk away? Not to hurt them, but to protect yourself? Not everyone will understand. You don't need to explain. Just type, "I'm here." If this story saw you, even for a second, I'm glad we found each other.